Okay, so we'll start. Okay, so the first one, so I'm gonna read it in Hebrew and then in English. The translation I have might be a drop different because the translation I have explains it a little, like explains like some of the words a little bit. So it goes like this: Akavia ben Mahalal Omer, Histakel b'shlosha dvarim be'ina ta'bal lidei avera, dam ayin basa, v'ana ta'alech, v'lefei ata asi litain ben mechezron. Akavia ben Mahalal says, look and consider these three things at all times, and you will not come to do an avera. Know from where you came, to where you are going, and before whom you are going to have to give justification and a detailed report of everything you did during your lifetime. So think about that for a second. And then we're going to read this next second half of it. It says, Me'ayin basa mitipa srucha, la'ana tahalech, l'makom afar rima v'saleya. Lefnei mi'ata asi litain din v'chezron, lefnei melech malchai hamlachim, v'kadosh baruch hu. The Mishnah explains, where did you come from? The body begins growing from a spoiled drop of fluid in the mother's womb. Where you're going, you'll eventually die and go to a grave, a place full of earth, worms, and maggots. Before whom he will give a detailed report before the supreme king of all kings, the Holy One, blessed be he. So it sounds kind of gruesome, like always think about where you came from and where you're going to, which is basically nothing, right? So let's first start out with who is this Rabbi Akavia ben Mahalal? Okay, so he lived in the times of the Second Temple, and he wasn't known so well in his younger days. When he was older, he became very famous, so much so that he didn't need a title in front of his name. Like a lot of people in the Talmud are called Rebbe. And he was just known by his name, Akavia ben Mahalal, and everyone knew and respected him. He was like just like a very well-known person. Now, he, another thing about him is he had an opposing view in four different halachic, rulings than the majority of the rabbis at the time. And the reason is because he said, I remember the previous generation, and the previous generation, the rabbis all said that this was the ruling. But this new generation, they all said, no, the ruling should be the other way. But since he remembered this from, his younger days, he wouldn't change. They said, okay, he was very well respected. And they said, if you agree with us on this ruling and join the majority, we'll allow you to be the head of the Supreme Court seat in the Supreme Jewish Court. And he said, no, I won't. Why? Because people will think that I changed my mind just to get that seat. And I don't want anyone to think that I did it for any type of political or honorable reasons. And so I did not, so he would not change his opinion of how those four halachic rulings should be. Hi, Malka. So when he got old and was getting ready, and he was before he passed away, he told his children, I didn't change my opinions of those halachic rulings. But
the day before the earthquake, and the next day his whole family was gone.
Malka, do you mind if you either put it on mute or turn off your TV?
Was paralyzed from the neck down, and her family was gone.
I'll put it on mute for you, okay? Okay. So he told his sons, you join the rest of the rabbis in agreeing with the halachic ruling that they have on these issues, even though I had a different opinion. And why? Because that is what the majority rules today, and you should join, you should be part of the majority. You shouldn't stick out or try to be different. And that's what's accepted today. But for me, since I'm from I remember from the older generation, I didn't want to change that. And then his son said, hey, will you put in a good word for us with the rabbis and tell them we're good people? And he said, no. He said, you have to earn it all by yourself. Okay. So now back to the Mishnah, what it's about. Okay. So why did he come up with a statement? Why did he say, why did he make people, this kind of statement that you guys, who are you? You're a low nothing. You come from a little seed, and you're going to go back to the earth. You're kind of like a nothing. Because he lived at a time when the Jews were very prosperous, and many times when people have a lot of material goodness, then they forget about their spirituality, they forget about the spiritual side of life. And he didn't want people to forget about their spiritual side. He didn't want them to just get carried away and the material and physical needs and wants. So he wanted them to remember the spiritual side of themselves too. And as we know, a person, right, is a neshama, is a soul and a body. So the soul lives forever, and the body dies. The material things that someone has are only good as long as a person's alive. Once they're gone, they can't take their Cadillac to heaven with them or anything. It's just materialism, and it's not something that they can take with them. But their spiritual deeds, their good deeds, they can always take with them. There's a deeper message to this Mishnah, and that is when it says know from where you came, it means where do you come from? Your neshama, your soul, is picked directly from below God's throne. So you're coming from such a special and holy place. Don't do anything that isn't like proper for someone coming from such a place to do. Like, so don't sin, don't like to get sully, don't get dirty, like don't do anything that wouldn't suit such a honorable person. And know who you're returning to. You want to return to Hashem, he's going to ask an account of what you did when you're down here on your world, and make sure you're worthy. Make sure everything you say is good, is good things. So this Mishnah also teaches us humility, because we always remember where you could think that you're the best and you're the greatest and you're doing so much good stuff and everything. And then as soon as you start to think, where did I come from and where am I going to? And it kind of keeps you in your place. Okay. There was once a wealthy man, and he left 2 wills for his family. One will, he said, open up as soon as I die. And the second will, he said, open up after 30 days. So, they're all excited. What's going to be in this will? He's a wealthy man. They open up the will, and it says in there, please bury me with a pair of socks, like wearing socks. And so they went straight away to the Chaver Kadisha, to the people in charge of the burial, and they say, please, our father requested to be buried with socks. And the Chaver Kadisha said, sorry, it's against Torah law to be buried with a pair of socks. Someone is buried, they're buried in shrouds. And they begged and they pleaded and they asked the rabbis, and no one would tell them that it's okay to be buried with a pair of socks. So, what could they do? They had no choice. They had to bury him without the pair of socks. And after 30 days, they open up the second will. And the second will says, by now you finally figured out that you can't bury me with a pair of socks. So this should be an important lesson for you. No matter how much money you have down here on earth, once you are going on to the next world, you can't even take your socks with you. Okay. So now that is the first Mishnah, Mishnah 1. Now we're going to go to Mishnah 2. I'm going to read it and translate it. Again, the translation might be a drop different than what's on the screen or what's on your paper, because it may have a little bit more explanation. Rabbi Hanina ben Skan HaKohanim Omer, Heve mispal b'shloma shel malchus she'ilmale mara'a ish esher ehu chayim b'lav. Rabbi Hanina, the chief assistant to the Kohen Gadol, says, daven for the well-being and success of the government, because it's not fear of the government. If not for fear of the government, people will swallow each other alive. Rabbi Hanina ben Tardion Omer Shnayim sheyoshvin be'ein b'neihem divrei Torah harei zeh moshav leitzim shenamar v'moshav leitzim lo yashav. Rabbi Hanina ben Tardion said, if 2 people sit together and then no words of Torah discussed between them, there's a gathering of fools who don't understand enough to appreciate the Torah's value, and a person should not sit with them. As it says in Tehillim, a righteous person does not sit among gathering of fools. Avos shnayim sheyoshvin v'yesh b'neihem divrei Torah shchina shruya b'neihem shenamar as nidberu yirei Hashem ish el riehu v'yakshev Hashem v'yishma v'kasev sefer zikaron l'fnei lirei Hashem v'choshvei shemo. If 2 people sit together and the words of Torah are discussed between them, the Shekhinah rests among them, as it says in Malachi. Then those who fear Hashem spoke words of Torah one to another, and Hashem paid attention and heard it, and their words were written in a book of remembrance before him to reward those who fear Hashem and think about his name. Ein li ela shnayim minayin afilu echad sheyoshev v'osek b'Torah she'HaKadosh Baruch Hu kaveh lo schar shneimar yoshev b'dar badad v'yadam ki natal alav. From the pasuk, we know that only Shekhinah rests among two people who discuss Torah. From where do we know even if one person sits alone and occupies himself with Torah, the Holy One, blessed be He, sets a reward for him? From a pasuk in Eicha, where it says, "Let him sit alone and study Torah quietly, because for doing so he can take reward for himself." Okay, so let's discuss that a little bit. So this is why from this Mishnah why we always try to share Devar Torah or something, some word of Torah when Jewish people are together, even if it's together for for dinner, for a meal, for something. We still try to say some words of Torah, because it's so important that when two Jews are meeting, we should have the Shekhinah rest with us. So some people like learning alone. So for some people, it's easier, right, to sit on their own and study. But it's always better to learn with somebody else. Why is that? We're talking about Torah. So there's a few benefits. One is that there's another perspective. So you got another person's perspective on it. You might learn some more. You might understand it better because you'll understand something one way. Someone else will understand something a different way, and it'll help you understand it. And, or maybe you'll understand a little bit of it and someone else understands more. So together you could figure it all out. Plus Hashem joins in your learning when you study with somebody else. So now we're going to discuss who is this first Rabbi Chadina that discusses in this Mishnah. So he lived at the time of the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, of the second temple. And he was able then to relate, after the temple was destroyed, he was able to relate to people what it was like living in the time of the second temple, living in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash. What is his title? It says,
I have a quick question. So you don't have Hashem with you when you study yourself? Is that what you just implied?
Well, no, but then it says you do, where it says over here, for this verse, it says alone and meditate states, indeed he receives a reward for it. It's still good, because it's value, it's good, but it's not as good as living together.
Oh, okay, it's good, but not as good.
It's good, but not, there's an extra added benefit when you live together.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Okay, you can go back to this guy.
Okay, so this guy, so why is he called Sagan HaKohanim? What does that mean? It means the assistant or the deputy of the Kohanim, and it's in plural form. Okay, the Kohanim is not just one Kohen Gadol, but it's plural. So how is he the assistant to many Kohen Gadol, many high priests? Because at the time when he was the assistant, there was a time, I think we discussed this before, when it was very corrupt government at that time, and people would pay their way to be the Kohen Gadol. Usually the Kohen Gadol was chosen out of who was worthy of it. But a certain time when the Romans ruled Israel, they kind of just let in anyone, either someone protexia or someone had a lot of money, they paid their way through or whatever it was. So he should have been a Kohen Gadol himself because he was worthy and he was doing the assistance for so long. But because there was all this corruption, he never really got to be Kohen Gadol. Also, the people who were Kohen Gadol were not worthy. What happened is if they would go in when it was Yom Kippur and they had to do the service, so Yom Kippur, part of the service was going into the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh HaKodashim. And if they weren't worthy, they would die. They wouldn't come out alive. So every year, the Kohen Gadol would die on Yom Kippur. And so he was assistant to, so let's say he did it for 5 years or 10 years, 5 or 10, different Kohen Gadols would, went through it that, because every year the person would not make it through Yom Kippur. So that's.
I have a question. Is that because, is that always happened from the beginning of time? Only because the Romans were there because they bought their way in? Or I don't understand how it's related.
So if they were not worthy, if the person or the community was not worthy, so the Kohen Gadol had to be very holy, very pious person. So if he was not really who he was supposed to be, so yes, from all time, if the Kohen Gadol for whatever reason did not pray properly, if he or the people weren't worthy, they would not make it out alive.
This doesn't matter. It's nothing to do with this could happen to the Greeks.
No, it happened any time, but it especially happened now because there were all these paid for
right. Okay. Did they do that because of the Romans wanted? Did they get influenced by the Roman because of payments, or we did it on our own, or
a mixture of all the above? You're living in a time when things are corrupt, and you're living with neighbors who aren't exactly who they're supposed to be. So then different people, push their way in and this and that. So it was a mixture of all the above. Obviously, the Jewish people weren't, not all of them were as good, and they were influenced by the Romans, and the Romans didn't mind getting the extra, since they ran and they were the government in charge, so
Well,
they were
could
able to
you
do what they
pay
want.
not to be guilty, like in the old, like in
Yeah,
this
whatever,
government?
yeah,
You
something like
say,
that.
it's like,
Something
hey,
like
I'm
that.
guilty if I pay you $100. How about I'm not guilty? It's like,
Yeah.
so
So that's why it's interesting that if we read in the first paragraph, it says, pray for the integrity of the government, that he still respected and called for people to respect and pray for the government, because here he was, who he could have had the position of Kohen Gadol if not for the corruption, not for the government being corrupt.
Yeah,
But
he
he
would have
didn't.
died. But he would not have
He was
died himself.
worthy. He was a good
He was
person.
worthy. I was like, he would not have died. Got it.
Right.
Okay,
So even though he had good reason to resent the government at the time, he still said that people should pray for him. Still said you have to have respect for the government and follow its laws. The next rabbi that speaks about in this chapter, Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion, they're both Rabbi Haninas, Rabbi Tradion, he lived in the city called Sachnin, which is in the lower Galilee, and he was the head of the court there, and he was a student of the famous Rabbi Akiva. What was he known for? He was a tzedakah collector. He collected tzedakah for people. And he was the father of a very famous woman named Bruria. Anyone hear of Bruria? Yes, Shirley? Okay.
I've heard of her, but I don't know much about her.
Okay. She was very famous. She's mentioned a lot in the Talmud. She was a big Torah scholar. And so she was well known. A little bit more about her we'll talk about a little bit. So besides her,
she was a Torah scholar, a big Torah scholar.
Yes, she was a big Torah scholar. A woman, yes, yes.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, and so besides her father being a great sage, this Rabbi Hanina, her husband was a very famous Reb Meir. So she argued with the rabbinical court, rabbinical law on certain issues, and she won. She proved her piece on certain issues that they ended up ruling in her favor. Even things like she even disagreed with her husband on certain halachic issues, which she proved to be correct. She was very smart and witty and very sharp tongue. So there's a very famous story that there was a
What's
group
her name again? Sorry to interrupt.
Bruria.
How you spell it? What's the first letter?
In English, B.
Yes, B as in boy.
Yeah.
Bruria, Bruria.
Yeah. Yes.
Bruria.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
So there was in the old days, there was a group of ruffians that lived in the area, and they made trouble for all the people around. And her husband prayed that they should die. Let's get rid of them. Get rid of them. We shouldn't have them in our midst. We should be able to live our lives, in peace. And Bruria said, "Why are you doing that? Instead of praying that they should die, pray that they should change their ways, that they should have better behavior." And she said it says, let the sinners be removed from the world. It's not that the sinners be removed from the world, it's let the sins be removed from the world. So even if you pray that they die, there might be other people who sin. So instead, pray that people change their ways. And sure enough, he did this, and he ended up transforming. He ended up, rehabilitating these ruffians to become good people because he listened to her. Another thing it says about Bruria is that the famous Eshes Chayil, woman of valor, King Shlomo wrote in honor of her, talking about her. So she, and there are other.
But wasn't Shlomo hundreds of years earlier? First temple. I don't get this. Wait, Shlomo. Shlomo.
Yes, I think
it's hundreds. Is that the first temple? This is the second temple, right? This is a totally different era.
Right.
He wrote it.
Maybe he knew she was going to be there. Maybe he wrote it in future. He knew that she was going to be the one. So back to her father, the Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion, who wrote the second part of this Mishnah. He was killed by the Romans. The Romans took 10 Jews and killed them in front of everybody. They're called the 10 martyrs. And he was killed for teaching Torah publicly when the Romans outlawed it. And what they do, they took him, they put like wet wool or wet cloth on his chest. They wrapped him in a Torah scroll, and then they put twigs inside, and then they burnt him alive. And they wanted to add the extra suffering. That's why they added like the wet cloths to him. And when he was, yeah, so like would have more suffering. Yeah. They did really cool stuff. We read these on Yom Kippur in the afternoon, each one and what happened to them, all just for learning Torah or teaching Torah. And what happened was that she saw her father like, suffering like this, and she's like, "Oh my goodness, how could you do this to my father? How could I see my father suffer so much?" And he called out to her. He said, "If I was just dying alone, I don't know like what would be, but because I'm dying with a Torah scroll, I know that he who avenges a Torah will avenge me as well." And that's how he died. Anyway, so back to the Mishnah that we're discussing. So what it says, pray for the government. I know not everyone always likes or believes in the government that is ruling over them. I mean, here in America, we're pretty lucky. At least we have a, officially a democratic government. But let's think of places where there was dictatorships or the government was super corrupt, or there's all kinds of problems. Why should you pray for the government? So it might not just be pray for the government that everything should be good with them, but also pray that they should make good decisions, that they shouldn't be corrupt, that they should deal with the people properly and honestly and be there for the good of the people. So it's not just praying for the government that the government should be strong, but that the government also should be a good government, a good ruling party.
So you pray no matter, even if you know it's bad, you can pray.
But you can pray that they should
change.
Good, yeah. That
Everything
they should change their ways. That they should be peaceful and civil. Yes. Okay.
Well, you could be peaceful and civil, but also hurt people by peaceful and civil. I don't know if peaceful and civil is the right thing. You could, civilly hurt somebody.
Okay. Well, and you know what I mean? Being not corrupt and just doing, being there, put this way, being earnest, honest.
Got it.
Okay. Okay. So the second part of the Mishnah where it says two people that sit together should say words of Torah between them. So it doesn't make a difference what you're sitting together for. So, commonly it's like you're sitting together, let's say to eat or whatever it is. But I know people like there was every year, me and Isaac, we have to go to like a wholesaler and we get the wine for Chabad for Pesach. And every time we go, the guy who runs the business says, if you're here, you have to tell us a word of Torah. And he makes his office a little, besides for doing the business side of it, we also have to do a Torah thing. Or like CPA we sometimes go to, we go to him, let's say, if, we need advice or work on things for Chabad. He says, okay, you're coming, but you need to say a word of Torah if you're coming. So even business people, even people are not, rabbis, but always, when they're meeting another Jew for a business, deal or for business work, business related, they should still share words of Torah, and that makes the whole business, the whole deal, the whole office into a place where Hashem rests himself. Hashem's Shekhinah rests. Okay. Okay. And now we're going to skip to the fifth Mishnah, number 5. And that is Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana Aimer Kol HaMakabel Alav Ol Torah Ma'avirim Mimeno Ol Malchus V'Ol Derech Eretz V'Chol HaPorek Mimeno Ol Torah Nosnin Alav Ol Malchus V'Ol Derech Eretz. Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana says, whoever accepts upon himself the burden of Torah, Hashem removes the burden and oppression of government and the burden and stress of the worldly affairs from him. Whoever removes the burden of Torah from himself, Hashem places the burden of government and the burden of the worldly affairs upon him. This is really interesting. Maybe it sounds a little bit intense. So basically, if Torah is your priority, then Torah will protect you because you'll be totally reliant on Torah. If we we just do what we need to do, and Hashem will do his part. But if we are pressured and anxious over like different burdens in life, and we don't think of Hashem as just taking care of us and that we're in Hashem's hands, then the Torah then we'll feel like all the burden. So like it's like burden. If you like give your life to Torah and you say, okay, I'm going to do what Hashem wants. I'm going to learn. I'm going to do the mitzvahs. Hashem's going to take care of me. Yes, you have to do what you need to do, whatever it is, to make a living, to stay safe, or whatever the issues in your life might be. But if you say, okay, I did my part. I'm putting my trust in Hashem. But if you say, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with this? I have this problem, I have this issue, I have the other issue, and you think of it as all as like your problems, then it's really going to feel like your problems. You're not living like a life with Torah. So it's kind of like I've seen this meme a lot. It says, don't tell Hashem how big your problems are, tell your problems how big Hashem is. I guess that's another way of saying this Mishnah. Okay, so who was Reb Nechanya? Okay, sorry, 1 second. Okay, so he says we learn. There's many reasons we can. Another thing he said, there's many reasons we can learn, right? You can learn because you might think it's enjoyable to learn. You might have intellectual stimulation when you learn. But the main reason that we should learn Torah is because Hashem said so. So you may have some side benefits. You might like it. It might be enjoyable. But you always have to remember the real reason you're learning Torah is because Hashem said. So who was he, and why did he say all this? Okay. So he lived during the time of the Roman rule when they hello? Okay. So he lived the time of the Roman when Romans ruled, when they outlawed Torah study. Here, you can take these papers. We're on the second page. Oh, is there 2 pages there? Okay. So we're on number 3. 5, I mean. 5. Okay. So he lived at the time when the Romans outlawed Torah learning. He died before the destruction of the temple. He also was one of the first people to write a book on Kabbalah. Okay. He lived up to a very, very old age, and he was buried in Tzfat. So his students, when he was old, the students asked him, what merited you that you lived to such an old age? And he said, I never rejoice at another person's embarrassment. Okay. So he was very careful not to be happy if someone else was shamed. And he said, I never went to sleep before forgiving somebody who annoyed me. Okay, so 2 very powerful things to think about. If you always make sure to forgive someone before you went to bed at night, and you never laughed at someone else's.
So he forgave them, but he didn't go to them and say, forgive me. But
I'm not sure to what extent. I'm not sure if he just forgave them in his heart, you're saying?
Yeah, I forgave him in his heart and before Hashem, but didn't go to the person.
Maybe he eventually, or I don't know if he didn't do anything for that to them. It's not like he had to go and say, it's like they annoyed him. So it wasn't like he did something to them and he said, oh, forgive me for, saying this to you. Right. Doing that to you. It was more like, I'm not going to have anything against them before I go to bed. I'm going to go to bed with a free heart.
Then I guess that's good. Okay.
Okay. He said he was also very generous with his money. So he gave a lot of tzedakah. So that's also another thing that kept him to living to an old age. Okay. So because he lived at a time when Torah study was forbidden, he wanted to show people how important Torah study was and how that was, the whole thing that keeps the Jewish people alive is Torah and mitzvahs. And so that's why he said this statement, this Mishnah, that how Torah study comes before, that's most importantly, and then the yoke of government is second. You have to.
Can you tell me when they outlawed it? Like kind of like the year 0, or approximately, or before that, like 100 BC. Approximately.
Every time from the story of Hanukkah.
Oh. But that was the Syrian Greeks. That was different people.
That was different Greeks. Oh, you're right. So there's the Romans. You're right. So this is later. Okay. So I don't have it right here in front of me. I can look it up.
Okay. I guess I could look it up sort of when they just
but it was, and I think they most of the time. Once the Romans took over, they weren't very
right. I'll find out when
sympathetic.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. So again, even though he enjoyed learning, he always reminded himself and others that the main reason we learn is Torah is to is for Hashem. It's for the holy obligation that we have. Okay, so where do we see this idea that if you rely on the Torah, then Hashem kind of takes care of you, or you don't have to have other burdens, like your regular burdens of whatever it is, if it's financial burden or other types of anxieties or issues, kind of like get taken care of. So when the Jews were in Egypt, right, and Pharaoh kind of tricked them into working for them, and then they ended up becoming slaves. What happened? It was one group of people, the Levites, the Levi, that they never fell into Pharaoh's trap. When Pharaoh said, "Oh, come, help me build some big cities, be part of the whatever it is, the renaissance of Egypt, the rebuilding of Egypt, or the building of Egypt," the tribe of Levi said, "No, we're busy. We learn Torah. We don't do other work." And so they never fell into the trap of being slaves. So they were never enslaved by Pharaoh. Maybe they couldn't come and leave as they wanted, but they never were actual slaves. They always were free.
So that's Moshe's family, right? Moshe's family.
Moshe's family and all the other Levites, all the other Levites. So because they did that, even though hey, how are they going to survive just learning Torah or just teaching Torah? They, Hashem took care of them. There's a story that also kind of brings out this idea about this famous chassid or Rebbe, whatever his name was, Rebbe Zusha of Anatolia. Kind of, a lot of stories about him. But he, every day, when whenever after he did his morning routine, he would say, "Hashem, Zusha wants to eat. Please provide food for Zusha." And his attendant knew that this was like the sign. They has to come and bring him his breakfast. So every morning, the attendant would come and bring him the breakfast after he would say this word, "Hashem, Zusha's hungry. Please bring food for Zusha." One morning, the attendant said, "Hey, this is ridiculous. How, he didn't ever ask me for the food. He knows where the food comes from. He knows that I'm the one that prepares the food and I bring it to him. Why should I give him the food just because he says, Hashem, Zusha's hungry, please bring food for Zusha? I'm going to teach him a lesson. I'm going to make sure he knows that the food is coming, that I'm working hard to prepare it. Hey, I put work into this. I put effort into this." So he decided that morning he's not going to bring the food. So time comes and Zusha says, "Hashem, Zusha's hungry, please bring food for Zusha." And the attendant says, "Okay, I'm just going to stand by. I'm not doing anything." And just at that moment, the door burst open. A guy comes with a big tray of food. And he says, "Reb Zusha, I have to tell you something. He says, "The other day I was walking on the road and I was in a rush and there was someone in my way and I kind of pushed him over. I didn't realize who it was. And the guy fell down. Afterwards, I realized it was you. There was a Zusha, and I felt so bad that I bothered you and I hurt you. So I came in to ask you forgiveness and I'm bringing you breakfast this morning." And the assistant, his mouth fell open. He said, "Oh my goodness, Hashem does provide Zusha his food, even if I don't." And he made sure never to do that again. So exactly, there's always somehow Hashem, you obviously, people have to do what they want. They can't just sit back and do nothing and expect money to come in or their health to be taken care of. There's actually a book called Shar HaBitachon. It means the gates of trust, gates of trust. And it's a book just to help strengthen your trust and faith in Hashem, when people are going through difficult times or things like that. There's actually, I actually just started listening online. This guy was a podcast. He gave the classes a few years ago, but he does it on how many classes. I started to listen to them, to the lessons. I can give you his name is Rabbi Shais Taub. If you're interested in listening, because it's very, very interesting, just like how you have to gain faith. And a lot of things that we spoke about today, he just in the first two lessons that I listened to, he speaks about how, people rely on money. They think that's going to get them through something. Or they're going to rely on, I'm going to do this and it's going to, you never know. It's only God who really gives you what he gives you. You might have a lot of money in the bank. It just means that Hashem's giving it to you to hold for the while. Anything could happen to it. Anything could happen. You just don't know. So a lot of interesting stuff that I could give you the information for that afterwards. Okay, so that is 3 Mishnahs from this week's Pirkei Avos chapter. I just wanted to end with today was the second day of Iyar, and that was the birthday of the 4th Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Maharash. His name was Rabbi Shmuel. He lived a very short life. He only lived till 58. He had a lot of health problems his whole life. And he lived from 1834 to 1882. He was the 7th child of the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek was a very one of the more known rabbis. He was the third Chabad Rebbe, but he wasn't the oldest child. He was actually the seventh, the last child of him. I mean, not last. Okay, seventh child of him. And when his father passed away, he took over the leadership, and he was very strong in fighting anti-Semitism that time in Russia, because that was very growing a lot. There's a lot of pogroms happening. He tried to get the government to step in and stop pogroms. He also just was a big activist for the Jewish community. I just wanted to share one story with him that he once traveled to Paris, and he went to a very expensive hotel called the Alexandria Hotel. I'm not sure if it's around anymore because I don't know Paris really well. And he went in there and he asked, I think it's, how much the room is for the night. And they said it's 200 francs. I'm assuming back in those days, in the 1800s, 200 francs was a large amount of money. And they said, which floor do you want to stay on? He said, I want to stay on the floor that has the game room, like all the, what's it called? Not the slot machines, but the cards, right? All like the gambling stuff. And like, first of all, the Hasidim were kind of taken aback. Like, why does the Rebbe need to be on the same floor as the gaming room, as the gambling? It's not a very Jewish thing to do. So anyway, so and that floor was even more expensive to stay on that floor. So he went to that floor. The other Hasidim, people came along with him. They couldn't even afford to stay in that hotel. They stayed like across the street or somewhere down the block where it was a little cheaper. Anyway, so they said he went to his room. He was very, and he stayed in the room for a while. And in the evening, he came out. He went to the game room, and everyone looks, like all of a sudden this rabbi, this great big rabbi, walking into like such a room. It kind of was like a little bit like everyone was a little taken aback and kind of like made a little bit of waves in the room. And he saw a young Jewish man. He went over to the young Jewish man. He said, young man, drinking non-kosher wine dulls the heart and mind to Torah. And he said it very strongly and very forcefully. And then he just went back into his room. This man obviously was shaken up. So after he finished playing, he went to find out where is this rabbi, which room he's staying in. And he had a very, very long conversation for deep into the night with the Rebbe Maharash. Afterwards, and the next morning, the Rebbe Maharash left, and the Hasidim said, what was this all about? And he said, for so many years, there's not been such a high special soul that came down into the earth, that came down to earth, and and his soul was such a high soul from such a high place, and he just he was like stuck in this like lowness and in the wrong things, and it's kind of like basically the Rebbe had to kind of like shake him out of there, and and from that I guess the man to change his ways doesn't have the sequel of the story, what exactly happened. And I guess that's how we'll end the class tonight.